Good evening and welcome to an Inside Government program for the spring 28 semester here at Cuyahoga Community College and broadcast on Spectrum, Verizon, Fios, the Auburn Regional Media Access, better known as ARMA, as well as Win 89.1, the college's radio station. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. For the last 3 weeks, much of the dialogue on the national stage has been centered around the issue of school safety and gun control in the wake of the Parkland school shootings. Since then, there have been heightened discussions about how to make schools safer, while there have been threats against schools, students, and personnel across the country. And locally, there have been at least 10 cases in central New York since Parkland. The Tuesday after the Parkland carnage, the Auburn Police Department and Auburn Fire Department, among others, took part in an active shooter exercise at Auburn High School. This was planned long before Parkland. We've asked on tonight Chief SHAWN Butler, Sergeant Greg DANN, who runs the SRO program, and School Resource Officer Chris Major to discuss not only the active shooter exercise at Auburn 2 weeks ago, but also issues related to school safety. And for the record, just so you are aware, Officer Major is my brother-in-law. Welcome to Inside Government.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks. So, been a couple of busy weeks for you all, but a lot of national discussion. So let's talk about the event 2 weeks ago that you had. I think it was 2 weeks ago, Tuesday. Yep. So you had an active shooter event. What is that, or exercise?
Well, it's just trying to, for us, to reenact an actual event and to gauge our response to that event. We had some participants from the patrol division, Auburn Fire, our emergency response team, all the players that would be involved in such an event, and they did not know the actual scenario. And
so what was the scenario?
The scenario was an active shooter within the Auburn High School. And basically, as Officer Major can tell you, it played out on how the officers reacted to the shooter. So he ended up barricading himself into a classroom with...
Not Officer Major, the shooter.
The shooter, correct.
Okay.
With, I believe, a teacher was correct. What it ended up with.
So just so the lay of the land, this was during school break, am I correct?
Correct.
So do you do active shooter events when you have students on premises?
No. Well,
you do for lockdowns?
We did have actors.
Oh, you did, okay.
We had kids from the New Visions program that volunteered to help.
Did you have nursing students? I thought I read
from
somewhere.
New Visions.
Okay.
Yep.
I think the mayor, in fact, how I found out about this, the mayor had just left you
yep.
and came here, and he was talking about it on the air, and he mentioned there were students, but I didn't know if it was, you had more than just actors. So what was their role?
Their role were to play victims.
Okay.
And to just, it's a tough scenario to talk about, but it's something we wanted to make it as real as possible. So some for the fire department, they have to triage when we bring them in. So some were obviously deceased, some were injured, and that just to make it, how are we going to react if we're ever in this situation? So the kids played the roles as they were assigned.
So do you design who designs the scenario for what you're going to do?
Our emergency response team.
Is that separate from the SROs?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's our SWAT team. It's what's commonly known as. So Officer Mike Roden, Joe Villano, and Sergeant Steve Dale are the commanders of that. And this is something that was, an idea of theirs to bring forward and to bring in not only the school district, the fire department. The whole premise was to engage the fire department in a dual training, because we don't do that very often, and we want to bring that partnership up to another level.
So as SROs, are you both stationed at the high school, or do you float around?
I'm not stationed anywhere.
You're not, okay.
I supervise, so I go to all of the schools.
So would you have been at the high school that day?
We participated in the training. It actually was set up so that an SRO would respond, because in a real situation, that's what's going to happen. If there's an SRO in the building, he's going to be the first one, or both of them are going to be the first officers to respond to an active shooter situation. So as part of the training, we incorporated that.
So you all knew that there was going to be some type of event for this?
Yep.
And it is you and who else?
Officer Martin and myself
are both up there. Okay. Just so
sure.
We can walk through. So the scenario is, do you know if this is a student who barricaded, or somebody who just walked in? It doesn't matter.
Nope, doesn't matter.
Okay, so walk us through from
so
start
Officer
to
Major,
end.
I think you had the
I get the initial call.
Yeah.
Okay.
So come in as I contacted by dispatch. We had an active shooter, or actually we had a potential shots fired, 3rd floor Auburn High. That's all I got. So I was on the second floor. I responded with another SRO. We get up to the third floor, and there's victims, students on the ground. The only thing I was asked to do prior to going to it was wait for patrol so we can clear everybody in this scenario. So before going to the halls, there was like maybe a 15-second, 20-second gap. I get up to the third floor, and you can hear what sounded like shots fired. They were putting off blanks and kids screaming.
Oh, okay.
It was very, I can say it was very realistic. I mean,
it's amazing how fast your
Yeah.
heart rate will go up, even though you know psychologically it's a training session. You know, you react. Very real.
So not giving out any trade secrets, once you get to that third floor, what do you do?
well, if I'm working in the school, your job is to go eliminate the threat. You're going to go engage. You're going to engage the threat and attempt to eliminate the threat.
But he has a hostage.
Again, we didn't going to that.
Okay. You
So
don't
going
know
down the hall,
that.
we didn't know that. So,
So they're going towards the shots. You know, that's where they're going to go. That's where you know that there's a threat, and it's continuing. That is the way we're trained to respond to the threat and eliminate the threat.
Okay. And then from there, what are the next steps once you get up there?
once we get up there, I'm continuing radio dialogue, explaining what's going on to responding patrol, requesting backup, requesting ERT.
So
requesting
your
the world at this
ERT is
point.
still downtown at this point.
They were on. So some of the things we had to kind of skip because we didn't want them racing through the city.
Right, okay.
Obviously, unnecessarily. So they're technically.
But they're
stayed.
called in.
Oh,
They're not in the building at that
no,
particular time.
no.
And how about Auburn Fire Department?
Same thing. I mean.
So Chief Morbido had his guys and gals there as well.
Correct.
Okay. And so what role did they play?
So ideally, what we as the police department want to do is isolate the threat, which is what the officers did. They located where the threat was, and they pinned them into a specific room. And obviously, correct me if I'm wrong.
Nope.
And then basically, we're backfilling from that point to secure the corridors. So is there more than one threat? You know, we're always trained. If there's one person,
There
count
could
on
be
two.
Okay.
If there's one gun, count on two. You know, so patrol starts arriving, and they're going to be an outer perimeter.
Okay.
Okay, at that point. So we know we have the threat cornered at that time into a specific room. So now patrol is going to set up an outer perimeter, and then ERT is then going to come in and secure all the way up into that point. And they're going to take over that perimeter outside that door, wherever the threat might be, start negotiations, things like that. So once we know that certain location is secure, then we're going to escort Auburn Fire in to start treating victims that we can treat.
And then
Pull them out.
I'm assuming the active shooter was somebody who had most likely a police officer. I'm assuming playing the role.
Oh,
of
playing the
actor.
role? It was actually the son of one of our officers.
Okay. So what do you do? So how did it end out? Get me to the finish
when
line.
we got to the door,
Because I know life is not 60 minutes.
No,
in
correct,
the sense
no.
that you start a show and after they do the Law and Order ding ding, you go to court and it ends. You don't wrap things
not
up
quite
in
that
30
easy. I wish it
60
was.
minutes.
No, once we identified he was in the room, we were able to speak to the door with him, find out there was a teacher in the room with him, a role player was a teacher. ERT arrived, negotiators were called in, which happens to be myself and Sergeant Dan, were one of the two negotiators for the department. They put a drop phone in, and we were able to engage in negotiations with the actor, with the suspect.
And does the actor know that at some point he needs to get to a certain point, or?
Well, I believe the way they first set it up, it could have went one or two ways, depending on our actions.
Oh,
if we
okay.
forced it, then A. If we negotiated, then it goes that way. And and it's a total. Now with a hostage, you have to obviously you want to try to negotiate. Life is obviously paramount. So they negotiated successfully through, and eventually he gave up his weapon and came out.
So how often do you do this? Is this something you do once a year, once every couple years? Because I'm assuming this takes some resources.
Specifically for the school, it does take a lot of resources, and that unfortunately is the detrimental part, where there's overtime involved, and you have multiple agencies.
Well, it's
involved.
planning. I'm just looking from the perspective of the planning.
Huge amount of planning. So this is something obviously we want to do more than once a year. I think it's very valuable.
Is that what you're averaging is once a year now?
Probably, yeah. And we'd like to incorporate patrol division as well, because we had a very limited amount of patrol. Patrol's going to be the first ones to show up, so we want them exposed to this type of thing as much as possible.
So this is obviously 6 days after Parkland. Did that change the scenario for you at all? Did you obviously, I think by that time there was criticism of one of the an officer who did not go in, and
You know, I think for the officers that are taking part in it, it really brings it home to the seriousness of it, and reminds you that it can happen anywhere at any time, and it's a valuable piece of training.
So this is different than a lockdown. Am I correct? What do you do in a lockdown situation? Because I was getting kind of confused in a conversation I was having the other day with somebody.
Well, we do lockdown safety drills throughout the school year, and ironically, you asked, does this change our perspective or how we do things, or even the scenario? It doesn't really. We're proactive. We've been proactive right along, doing lockdown
It's just
drills.
a fluke this occurred.
Yes. In fact, when Sandy Hook happened, we had just done a lockdown drill at an elementary school the day prior to it occurring. So unfortunately, these tragic events happen, but we're proactive. We're continually training. We're continually doing drills. We're continually meeting with the school district to address safety issues and security issues within the schools. So we're proactive right along. It's not something that if one of these things happen, we say, oh, we got to start doing this. We're doing it right along.
And so when a lockdown drill, do you do this at all schools?
In 2008, when I took over as the school resource officer supervisor, the first year we did unannounced lockdown, announced lockdown drills, where we actually met with the school district and said, this is what we'd like to do. We explained to them the procedure for a drill, what we would do, how it would work with the school, and everybody was part of the planning, the students, the staff, and once we ran through the drill, we critiqued it afterwards. That first year we did it as an announcement. After that, we started doing unannounced drills where we would do the same things they were taught to do that first year, but we would just call the school and say, put the school in lockdown, and then we would go there and would respond like we would respond in an actual active shooter situation. And the school was responsible for doing the things they were taught that first year. And we've been doing that continually right up until this year. And we do an unannounced lockdown drill in every school in the district at least once a year. Sometimes we do, a couple.
And is it A, to get staff prepared for that, or also to find out where there are holes in your process?
It's both.
Because schools right now are much, I remember going to Genesee Elementary School, and I'm thinking maybe you're a little younger than I am. You've been with the department 29
years. Yeah.
22, 18. So you and I most likely remember duck and cover, because obviously a nuclear explosion wasn't going to hurt us if we were all under desks.
Right.
But we went from fire drills now to lockdowns. So it's a whole changed world.
Yeah, and the funny thing is a lot of the trainings that we go to, they emphasize the fact that how many fires do we have in schools in the last 10, the last 15, last 20 years? And we really don't have fire drills. I mean, there's requirements under the law to do fire drills, and you see all of the fire alarms throughout the schools. Everything is made so that it's fire resistant. So everything's prepared for fire, but we haven't had a fire in a school in many years. So that's one of the...
It's usually a lab issue or somebody's...
Very isolated.
Or
yes.
it's an emergency response in the sense of a health issue.
Right. So that's the thing. That's kind of the joke, the running joke every time we go to an active shooter training is usually the instructor starts talking about fire drills and how we're so well prepared for fire drills, but we're not prepared for lockdown drills and for active shooters.
For the active shooter, do you bring in outside assistance as well to help you advise or look at procedures, or is this in-house in the sense of in the city fire place?
Yeah, that's the start. That's
okay.
Because we work together every day to get with the fire department on a traffic accident
right.
But at this level, this is something new for us. So it's baby steps.
And because the high school is just on the border of the city of Auburn. In fact, it used to be outside the city of Auburn until it was annexed. Do state troopers or the sheriff's department play any role in these exercises?
This one they did not.
Okay.
We'll bring in next time. It'll get bigger.
Okay.
When we really roll it out, and it'll get bigger. But in a real life scenario, absolutely, they would be called almost immediately, because in these
More
types of
people
scenarios,
on.
we're going to run out of resources instantaneously.
So back to the lockdown. So there's no advance notice for something like that, in the sense that every teacher doesn't know there's a lockdown at 11:13 today.
Correct.
The district knows.
They're always, nobody knows.
Oh, nobody knows.
Nobody
Okay.
knows except for me.
Oh,
And,
okay.
I will call the guys and I will tell them we're going to do this school.
I
at
know a
this
lot of
time.
kids who are just around exam time would
Yeah.
be really, hey, could you call it at?
Yeah, and we'll meet beforehand. I'll give them the floor plan. I'll
Okay.
assign them an area, and we'll call the school and tell them put the school in lockdown. And they'll make an announcement that the building's in lockdown. Things have changed a little bit over the course of the 10 years that I've been doing this, but we'll just call the school. They'll make an announcement, and when we get there, everybody should be locked down. They're assigned a particular area. They will go to those areas and check to look for, being able to see in the classrooms, being able to see if there's any open doors, if there's any issues with security. So they go through, they check everything, they come back to me and let me know, okay, everything's checked, and they'll jot down whatever issues there are, whether there be open doors or they could see children through windows or whatever. And then because of the way the system is set up, they're only allowed to say the drill is over if they're physically released by law enforcement. Okay. So what we do in our drills is the officers that are assigned to that particular area, once they're done checking and jotting down the issues, they go back and physically unlock the door and say, okay, this is the time that you would be released and evacuated by law enforcement, but just stay in your room. This was a drill, and we'll make an announcement at the very end of the drill once everybody has been let out. So it's very realistic that, right from the start, it's a lockdown. They don't know if it's an actual lockdown. They're supposed to go to that designated safe area in their room, lock down, and they're not supposed to respond to anything until one of the officers actually physically opens the door.
So you all have children, mostly 22 through about 14, roughly. Oh yes, there's one younger. Sorry about that. I should know better. So you've been there 10 years doing SRO. Has this funneling of single point access been something that's done long before that, or is that something the Auburn Police Department said, listen, we really got to start doing this?
We we are both, including the other SROs, are on the district-wide safety committee. It's made up the superintendent, assistant superintendents, some teachers, some administrative staff, and the SROs. And we meet monthly and go over all issues as it relates to safety and security. So it's a process throughout that is definitely something that would be recommended. The fact that
But I'm assuming all of them, it sounds like all of our six schools that you occupy, they're all single point of access.
They're all single point of access now.
So the days of propping up a door,
Yeah.
opening a window, I mean, because one of the problems with all the Auburn schools is, and it's just a capital issue, is you don't have air conditioning. And so if somebody wants to cool it down, when we get these freak days where there's either snow blizzard one day and 2 days later, so this whole idea of propping up doors and windows, you're training people not to do that anymore.
Correct.
And that's been a process, and that's been, I've had the opportunity to take part in some of these drills, and I've seen over the years how it's getting better and better and better. And recently, in one of the drills, I know there was some little bit of uproar on social media about parents not being advised beforehand. We did a lot because the kids were somewhat frightened and texting mom or dad, and there's a purpose behind it. If we started announcing prior all these lockdown drills, then it becomes just it absolutely loses its effect. We want it to be as real as possible. We want them to react as they would in a real situation.
See, Duck and Cover didn't have social media.
Yes.
I mean, we don't even have time to get in that social media, because I know you're both dealing with that issue as well. A couple of questions on just the SROs. How many SROs do we have?
We have 4 currently. We have 2 at the high school full-time, we have 1 at the junior high school, and we have 1 that rotates between the 5 elementary schools.
And is that the one at the elementary schools there a day a week, or you just
Well, initially he used to be there a day a week, but after you talk about us meeting and discussing safety and security things, the schools, we met and they wanted a little more coverage. So having him at one school all day was nice, but they said, well, how about having him here a half day, 2 days, so that we can have him here 2 days a week, only a half day. I understand that, but more coverage because he's going to be at that school 2 times rather than once all day.
And right now, the city is paying for the SROs, but that's eventually moving over, or is it all
the school
over?
district covers approximately 3/4 of the
We're in
salary?
year 2 of a 5-year contract, and by the end of the 5 years, the school district will be paying for the entire program.
Okay, so it's a shift in. So eventually, if they want to add more officers, they would have to contract for you for that. Are all of your officers armed?
Yes.
What type of problems are you now seeing in schools that you maybe didn't see? How long have you been an SRO?
I think my 12th year, 11th or 12th year.
Okay. And before you were supervisor, were you an SRO before you were the supervisor as well? Okay.
Nope. I was
So
a road supervisor.
So 10 and 12 years, what are you seeing that you didn't see 10 years ago?
You hit the nail on the head. Social media. That's 90% of our issues. I mean, daily. I mean,
Well, that
before I came
apparently
here.
was an issue right after Parkland. Wasn't there an issue at the junior high school on the Friday after where there's, I hate to use this analogy, but like a game of telephone, somebody heard something who told somebody else, and I don't even know if
That's everyday issues, though.
Right.
That's-
We're getting that daily. I mean,
So how do you deal with it?
oh boy. The best thing for us to do is just communicating with the kids. When they come in, we try to get ahead of it, and it's hard to do. It's almost impossible to do. But luckily, I have 2 high school age kids, as you know, and they kind of keep me in the loop of what's going on. But the big thing is when kids are having issues or see things, they come to us. I mean, typically, the other day a girl saw somebody outside. Here's a positive use of social media or technology. She contacted somebody on the inside. She was leaving for the day, who came to us. We identified the person. It was a parent. We just in an odd spot at an odd time. So there's positive ways we use social media.
So are students allowed are they allowed phones, not in the classroom, but they're allowed to have it on them as long as it's off? Am I correct on that?
They can have them in school
Okay.
pretty much now. It's
They're
impossible.
actually starting to incorporate them into
Yeah.
classroom instruction.
Keeping a phone from a child,
So
like taking care
they're
away.
almost now allowed to use them in class for certain instruction.
Okay. And your officers cover school events?
Correct.
Only the ones that are held in Auburn?
Correct.
Okay, so hockey game this weekend in Buffalo, good luck. Auburn, that's not necessary, but anything that you're doing from a school dance to...
Most all the extracurricular activities the guys cover. Anything that there's a concern about security.
Do you have
We may
concerns
not
about
cover
events?
a volleyball game,
Okay.
but we'll cover the football, we'll cover the basketball, we'll cover the dances.
It's a larger crowd events.
Right.
Okay. Senator Pat Galvan, who's a state senator, has suggested that we should have SROs or school security, armed security on every school campus. Is that something?
That's great. I would be all for it, but it's
It's a
comes down
resource
to it.
issue.
It's a funding issue, absolutely,
Okay.
and a resource issue. Yeah, correct. But no, I mean, I'm definitely for the program. I would love to expand the program. It's just
So Auburn uses police officers, and I know some, and this is where Senator Galvan and several others, I think, have talked about, of using either retired police officers or more likely former military personnel. Any thoughts on that?
well, I can tell you, in just even if you had retired corrections or police officers that no longer have police powers, they would be calling on our resources to investigate criminal activities and things of that nature. So
Because you have the power of arrest,
Absolutely.
those would not.
correct.
Okay. So are guns too accessible?
Are guns too accessible? That's a tough question.
So let me ask you this. You've now seen how many shootings? I know there was a debunked number. There was 18 since the first of the year from Bloomberg. But is this an issue of access to guns or mental health?
Personally, and from a professional standpoint, I would lean more towards the mental health and how we're dealing with or not dealing with mental health. I think our resources towards mental health have changed dramatically in my career. Institutionalization of the mentally ill is not as relevant or as popular, and we're treating them as outpatients. So there's not oversight. Individuals, that may be prescribed medication, and when they're on their medication, are perfectly normal, contributing members of society. But under a controlled environment, they get that regimen of counseling and medication, but when they're living on their own with no supervision in society, they skip medication, they don't go to counseling.
So more resources towards mental health.
I really truly believe that is an avenue that we really need to explore.
So a couple of real quickie items before we run out of time. Should teachers be armed?
I don't think that we're there yet. I think we can look at it a different way.
The President, I think yesterday seemingly said there's a link between video games and gun violence. Do you agree? I mean,
you know, I have a son.
And you don't have to, I'm not talking about the politics of it, I'm saying.
I have a son, as does Chris, that I'm sure is into these games, and I don't see him as. I think it's home structure, home life, and it's a combination of.
But a game like Grand Theft Auto, where you can shoot
absolutely
police officers or innocent bystanders, is not something that changes the perception of violence.
I think it can, but it's also, you have to weigh that with how that child's being raised, or the lack of parental supervision or accountability at home as well.
Are we at a point where we need to have metal detectors in your schools?
It's an added level. It's another tool for us.
I don't think
it can't hurt. I don't, you know, there's ways around anything. You know, we look at airports and people, we go through the security there and people still are able to get certain things.
If they
done.
want to get through, they'll get through.
Absolutely.
So a couple of just real quickies, because there's a lot, since Parkland there's been a lot of talk and a lot of sales pitches. So we've got guys selling backpacks with Kevlar, you know, it's almost a state of fear selling. They're selling them online and in stores. Are they effective from what you have read? And these backpacks that you'd give a 5-year-old, I'm not sure mine can even hold up with that. But
you know, I saw there was a school, and I think I shared it with you guys, that's going to the next level of institutionalizing some measures within the school, being smoke coming from the ceiling, and kids are using books.
Well, they're buying shelter in place, like these tornado prevention.
That they all get the bubbles that they get into in a room.
We're not at that stage, are we?
I don't think we. I mean, how
are they? I guess first of all, are they effective, and are they a wise investment?
And that's the thing. I mean, are we going to, as a society, going to be able to afford to do that in every school? And it's just not practical. I think there's other measures that are more practical and more culture changing. And
we're looking at small things like we just discussed yesterday at our district safety committee meeting. The school actually received funding to purchase visitor management systems, which are kiosks that are placed at the front of each school, which will actually require visitors to put some type of state identification into.
Like when I walk into a hospital and I have
correct.
to, okay.
Yep, and it will actually read whether that person's wanted, whether there's an order of protection, whether they're a sex offender, and then once it reads that, it will send an alert if there is a concern about somebody. You can have it sent to the SRO, to the school administrator, and then what's even better is once that process is done, it will print out, based on that ID, a picture and all that person's pedigree information, so that's what's sticking on their shirt and not somebody just writing their name on a plain piece of paper and stick it, because anybody could do that.
So 2 last questions. What would you tell parents about safety in schools right now?
I'll defer to you guys.
Communication. I think that if parents are concerned, we're always open to meeting with them, speaking with them. Our email addresses, our phone numbers are online. We have a Facebook page that we monitor through the SRO program. It's communication. If they're concerned or got questions, reach out to us.
We've been doing these drills for so long, these lockdown drills, that we're pretty proficient at them. What I would recommend is they follow their training, what we've taught them to do. You know, we've taught them how to react in these active shooter situations with the drills that we do, and just, you know, follow what we've taught them.
If I can add, I mean, we can't have parents, you know, perpetrating paranoia at home as well. You know, talk to your kids, explain the life that we, you know, the society that we live in, and that there are dangers, but be prepared. Talk about, you know, avenues of how to avoid or being aware of your surroundings and in your safety, your own personal safety.
So paraphrasing a guest we had on the other night, I don't want to quote them directly, but they said you can't prevent everything.
Absolutely.
And we were talking about school safety and campus safety, but you do the best you can.
Yeah. And I think we're doing a pretty good job. You know, I would never say that we're ever going to be 100% secure and safe, but I'm proud at the relationship that we have with our school district and what our SROs and Sergeant Dan have done way before this has really become a national issue. I think we're really ahead of the curve, and kudos to our local officials for continuing and believing in the SRO program and in the partnership that we've developed with the school district.
Well, we want to thank our three guests. They have been Chief SHAWN Butler, Sergeant Greg Dann, and Officer Chris Major, who's an SRO, and the head of the SRO program is Officer Dan, for joining us today to talk about your shelter in place, your active shooter, and events around that. And you're always welcome to come and discuss what's going on at the department. We'll be back in just a minute with Beyond the Front Page with Stephanie DeVito, who is the Executive Director of the Auburn Downtown Business Improvement District. We are off next week as students are doing some exams and some work here on campus. But on March 20th, we do return with 2 back-to-back Inside Governments. The first one with Auburn City Manager Jeff Dygert for a city update, and then we'll be followed by Owasco Town Supervisor Ed Wagner and County Planning Director Steve Lynch to talk about Owasco Watershed and their inspection process. We would like to let you know that if you have ideas or thoughts for guests or questions, you can send them to us at cozguitho@aol.com, or you can write us at Inside Government, 141 Dunning Avenue, Auburn, New York, 13021. I'm Guy Cosentino for KU Community College. We hope you'll stick around for a few minutes to listen to what's going on in downtown, but otherwise have a good night and have a great tomorrow. And we'll